By the way, I don't know if you guys saw this. This is a advisor, this is an ex-advisor to Israel's prime minister talking to a BBC presenter about the situation that Gazans face right now, and if Israelis, by bombing the Gaza Strip as they are right now, are defending themselves.
The Israelis would say, well, look, we are defending ourselves. We are targeting Hamas targets in Gaza. We are trying to put an end to what we believe is a terrorist organization once and for all.
Do you really keep a straight face when you say that? Do you think terrorist organizations embedded in populations who are denied their most basic rights are ended once and for all in a military campaign? Does that happen in history? Can someone credibly tell me that when the leadership of a country says we are cutting off food, electricity, water, all supplies to an entire civilian population, that they're targeting militants? I'm sorry, these kind of lies can't be allowed to pass. And when you tell yourself the lie, it leads to the wrong policy. If anyone told me that what the militants did on the weekend was a legitimate response to years and years of occupation, I would say, no, you're wrong-headed. You've lost sight of humanity and reality. And if anyone tells me that what Israel is doing in Gaza today is a legitimate response to what happened on the weekend, it's exactly the same.
And yet they are saying it, and yet the international community is saying that.
Yes, and people need to challenge them on it, because it's a lie, and we're warmongering if we allow them to get away with it.
Damn. True. True's in chat. True. I think we should read this opinion piece in Haaretz that calls Netanyahu a gang leader who can't go on serving as Israel's PM. I wanted to read it because the Israeli press has been tearing Netanyahu a new one. We've been getting more and more reports about the failure, the intelligence failure that happened under Netanyahu's watch, where they took soldiers, they funneled them into occupied territory in the West Bank to prepare for possible violence between settlers and locals in the area. They got reports from Egypt and other reports of something happening. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad were training for weeks on the border, storming fake settler kibbutz compounds and preparing for this type of an operation. And they were completely blindsided. And not only were they blindsided, but the border that they had with Gaza was less defended than usual because they rerouted troops into the West Bank in preparation for the possible settler violence. Just a failure on every level. Just a complete failure. And not only did they fail in preventing the attack, they failed in responding to the attack. It took like 10 hours for Israeli troops to get to a lot of these communities. 10 hours of Hamas going around just mowing people down. 10 hours. That 1,200 number is going to go higher. I'll just be blunt with you. It's going to go higher. It's going to get higher. We're going to get more dead Israelis. We're going to find more bodies. We're going to find more burnt out remains in these destroyed kibbutzes, in the destroyed Israeli homes in southern Israel. And the response the government has had to the families of the victims has been awful. The Washington Post wrote an article today where they were talking to family members of people kidnapped and to family members of those who lost people to the slaughter. And the government has not communicated with them basically at all about the process of trying to get their family members returned, or as to, their failure in talking to them about, their family member dying. Now, the second part is bad, not talking to those who have lost family members, but not talking to those and not properly communicating with those whose family members are currently in Hamas custody, who could be being tortured, who could be executed at any point, that Hamas has openly said that they will execute as civilians continue to die in airstrikes, and then the Israelis continue to kill civilians in airstrikes. Those family members are probably panicked, thinking any day they're going to have Hamas deliver on their promise to record a video of them executing their cousins, brothers, sisters, fathers, daughters, and sons. And the Israeli government doesn't really have a plan as far as we know. Are they going to send in special operations forces? I know Mike Pence was proposing on Twitter that Joe Biden should gather everybody in the Situation Room and send in special operation forces to get our boys out of the Gaza Strip. But, number one, you would need the intelligence to know where they are. And considering how unprepared Israel was to know about this operation in the first place, I find it hard to believe that they're going to have that intelligence on hand unless they've gathered it in the last few days, paid off some people, have some infiltrators in Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad that could bring this up or gather this information. But Netanyahu has failed on every level. His mandate in power was, I keep Palestine in line. We can manage the war. We can manage the conflict. Don't worry about it. We don't need to give the Palestinians a fair shake because we're Israel. We're strong. And with a good managed security policy, we can keep Gaza with Hamas, but we can manage our relationship. We can manage our relationship, manage the occupation. This is sustainable. We can do this in perpetuity. And on October 7th, that lie shattered. It's shattered. This is not a conflict that we should just all allow to exist in perpetuity forever. That eventually, the pressure cooker, you leave it on and let it to keep building, will explode. So I want to talk about how the Israeli press is treating Netanyahu. So here is an opinion piece from Haaretz, one of the most popular Israeli digital news publications in Israel. And the title is, Netanyahu, a gang leader who can't go on serving as Israel's PM. This is by Svi Burrell. Let's read it. What we do to the enemies will reverberate for generations, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed in his empty speech on Monday. Instead, he should have adopted Mechanism Begin's famous statement from 1983, I can't go on, which was made after he, too, had thought what Israel did in Lebanon during the First Lebanese War would reverberate for generations. Mechanism Begin resigned during that war and was replaced by Shamir. With his departure, the consul lie that you can't replace a prime minister during wartime also collapsed. I also want to let you guys know that Benjamin Netanyahu has announced that he's going to be doing a wartime unity government with Benny Gantz, the head of the Blue and White Party that has collapsed in popularity after he made a deal with Netanyahu on a different occasion. Israel is now headed by a corrupt leader, a criminal defendant who just a moment ago was investing all of his effort in carrying out a judicial coup. This is in reference to the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu wants to remove some of the independence of the judiciary by making it so that they can basically vote in who is appointed to the judiciary. And if you have a legislative majority, then that's how you vote them in. And Israelis are not happy with that. They see it as a man who is currently facing corruption charges, making it so that he can have more direct influence over the judiciary. And the protests against it were ginormous, and the internal backlash from Israeli citizens who believe that this was trampling upon their checks and balances, upon their democracy. Some of them serving in the IDF were refusing to serve out of principle because they were fighting for, in their mind, a version of Israeli democracy with checks and balances. And so part of the unreadiness is being blamed on Netanyahu trying to continue to pursue this, even though it's producing a bad relationship between him, the intelligence services of Israel, and general Israeli society and the Israeli military. He has turned Western governments against him and undermined relations with the U.S. administration. He had marked the army. He has done that, by the way. He especially did that under the Obama administration. Obama and Netanyahu had a terrible relationship. Netanyahu was basically campaigning for Mitt Romney in 2012. He was meeting him and shaking his hand on the campaign trail in the States. He has marked the army, the Shin Bet security services, and a majority of the public as enemies of the people. And now he's leading the country into a war in which nobody even knows the precise goals, much less the outcome. If you ask him, he'll say to destroy every Hamas militant, which is an unbelievably impossible standard to set. This is a prime minister who doesn't even recognize the need for a national emergency government. Well, now he has a national emergency unity government, as far as I know, because he's sure he's irreplaceable. He is now likening himself to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, a true leader who has fought bravely against a superpower invasion. Yet Netanyahu himself spent years nurturing the enemy that invaded Israel this week without let or hindrance or his watch due to his terrible failure, without accepting even a shred of responsibility. Shortly before the war began, in the heated but air-conditioned theater of the... Sorry. I've got stage 7 Ebola. Sorry. A war for Netanyahu's political survival was being waged. The Supreme Court was discussing whether it was possible to declare him incapacitated because he violated his conflict of interest agreement. The petition essentially seeks to declare, without any legal authorization, that millions of citizens took the trouble to exercise their right to vote in vain, he argued in his defense. Those same millions of voters who gave his governing coalition 64 Knesset seats have since lost hundreds of their relatives. The thousands of their friends have been wounded, their relatives have been imprisoned in safe rooms for hours in paralyzing terror as they tried to find out what had happened to their loved ones without being able to get any answers, and they still don't know what else awaits them. So do they have an obligation to remain loyal to the vote they cast 11 months ago, when the situation was quote-unquote wonderful? Does their vote grant him an exclusive, absolute, irrevocable right to steer Israel into a war whose end even he doesn't know, with no plan and no goal? You know what this reminds me of? And God, the Afghanistan comparisons, I've been dragging them out, and I don't like dragging them out too much because not all wars are the same, and, you know, the geopolitics between 9/11 and it's different. Obviously, we're not engaged in annexations of like territory of like Afghanistan or anything like that. But this reminds me so much of Barbara Lee's lone vote against the invasion of Afghanistan, not because she didn't want to go after Al-Qaeda. She believed that Al-Qaeda needed the pain, they needed to hunt down the terrorists who engaged in 9/11 to discourage this type of stuff from happening in the future, and to let terrorists know that if you kill American civilians, America will hunt you down to the ends of the earth and eliminate you, to make sure that you can't do it again, and to send a message to people who'd have the same idea. She didn't believe that wasn't the case. Like, every single congressman believed in that. What she was worried about was the fact that this rush to invade Afghanistan was done with no exit strategy, was done with not the clearest of guidelines laid out for our rebuilding plan, or if we're going to rebuild the country, or if we're going to do what John Bolton wanted, which is just go in, kill everything, throw the U.S. Constitution on the ground, and leave. Where were we? After all, this is the same prime minister, the same recidivist liar. This is one of the most popular news publications in Israel. Recidivist liar, who, as even many of his voters now realize, is guided by only one principle: saving his own skin. Did he suddenly experience an epiphany that led him to understand the good of the country as well? Is he even fit to determine what the good of the country entails? How nonsensical his call for national unity sounds when he is the one who determines who is fit to be a partner in that unity. This is also the same prime minister who exploited the public legitimacy he gained 11 months ago to put a gun to the state's head, first through his war on democracy, and now in his mad race towards a war of vengeance. The gun is still on the table, and the price tag attached to it isn't just smashing our democracy, but also Israeli lives. More than 100 Israelis are now imprisoned, in terrible fear, in cellars and tunnels in the Gaza Strip. And perhaps they have already heard the remarks of fanatic finance minister Bezalel Smotrich, who sees them as collateral damage that shouldn't be taken into account during this holy war. That's also what, again, let's just play it again, because the clip is bizarre, that bloodthirsty maniac of Lindsey Graham calling this a holy war, like he's a crusader sent on the mission by the Pope. Listen to this.
We're in a religious war here. I am with Israel. Do whatever the hell you have to do to defend yourself. Level the place.
Dude, Lindsey Graham is not Israeli. Lindsey Graham does not live in southern Israel. I can understand somebody who, you know, whose family member was literally just shot in the head, you know, some random civilian, and who just lost his whole family to like murderous terrorists and had their child burnt alive. Why they would say something like parking lot or level the place. If you talk to a lot of New Yorkers the days following 9/11, you're probably going to get a very similar sentiment. But he's a standing U.S. politician who doesn't even fucking live there. And he's talking about leveling a city that is 50% children. bloodthirsty maniac. God did not tell you to kill those kids. Anyway, continuing. A prime minister like this is wholly disqualified for office, even if legally he can find some provision of law to hide behind, even if the court rules that a new law making it impossible for the attorney general to declare him incapacitated is a role model for good legislation. Benjamin Netanyahu won't suddenly become a leader whom we can expect to accept responsibility. He's a gang leader who has been stripped of responsibility even, and perhaps especially, during wartime. Netanyahu, to quote the former Israeli prime minister in 1983, can't go on. That isn't the only backlash. It hasn't only been in the Israeli press. Israeli public society is just fed up with this response. Fed up with the response and the failure of the government. Here's an example of local Israelis at a hospital, including one is somebody in a nurse's gown. I can't confirm they're a nurse, but I mean, look at them. And a local sitting on a bench that a Knesset member was trying to talk to, how they reacted to it, to them seeing them in the hospital or seeing them approaching the hospital. They are not happy, and they get yelled at and bombarded enough with cries of, this is your failure, that they just walk away. They just leave.
הייתי ילדה טובה, לא? היית ילדה טובה, הרסת הממשלה הזאת, הרסתם את המדינה הזאת, הרסתם את המדינה הזאת, תלכו מפה, תלכו, עכשיו זה תורנו, אנחנו עכשיו נשאר פה, אנחנו נעזור, ימין, שמאל, עם מאוחד, בלעדיכם, אתם הרסתם את המקום הזה, הרסתם, לכו מפה! טוב, די, מה יש לך?
Boatman Choosy, thank you so much for the prime. Anyway, my main point I want to make in this segment just is, this isn't Russia. You can't, and I've said this before, but I want to just emphasize it again and again and again when I get the opportunity. You can't just arrest all the journalists in Israel that criticize you. You can't just arrest the bloggers who are criticizing your military actions as ineffective and your leadership is ineffective. Israel, even though the crackdown on the judiciary was bad and it was received very poorly for obvious reasons, Israel still has a civil society, has some form of a civil society that can respond to him. And now he's going to feel the full force of that. Because it seems that the two groups that Israelis are most pissed at is, number one, Hamas, and I would include Palestinian Islamic Jihad in that, and number two, Netanyahu's government. Netanyahu's latest campaign ad, this is from 2019, ahead of the September 17th election. Israeli politics is absolutely brutal, but at least the ads are often gently self-deprecating compared to the Hollywood action movies you see in the U.S. elections.
כל המתרחצים, נא להישאר בימין, זה הרבה יותר בטוח.
ביבי? ראש הממשלה, מה אתה עושה פה?
מה זאת אומרת? כמו תמיד, שומר עליכם.
וואלה, בים?
בים, באוויר, ביבשה, בכל מקום שצריך.
לירות.
צריך להיות מוכן לכל תרחיש.
ועד מתי אתה פה?
מה זאת אומרת?
He must be prepared for every scenario. God damn, that aged poorly. Jesus Christ, that's bad. Oh my God. He couldn't have put it in a worse way. Prepared for every scenario, and he wasn't prepared for an attack across the from the Gaza Strip as they were being given intelligence on something being prepared by Egypt, and they were doing training on the border for months. Not only training, but like bombing attack escalations as well.
זה תלוי בכם. ב-17 בספטמבר אני אמור להתחיל משמרת נוספת. אבל רק אתם תחליטו מי ישמור עליכם.
לא, למה מי יכול להחליף אותך? אומרים שם צבא?
לא יודע, ברק לא מכה פעמיים. חכו שנייה. החבר'ה עם הבוגי, אתם כבר לא בימין, אתם עמוק בשמאל. כל הזמן נסחפים אלה. יאללה חבר'ה, כנסו למים, תהנו קצת.
לא, יש הרבה מדוזות.
מה אתה אומר? איווט הבטיח לחסל אותם לפני 48 שעות.
לירות!
לכל תרחיש. אזרחי ישראל, בים הסוער של המזרח התיכון, הוכחנו שאנחנו שומרים על ישראל כאיש של יציבות ושל ביטחון. אבל כדי שנוכל להמשיך, אתם צריכים להצביע מחל.
Proven leadership, Netanyahu. God, that didn't age well. Yeah, no, his image is shattered. We'll see, though. Israeli politics is always full of surprises.